The Ottoman Empire was known to be one of the longest-lasting and influential empires in history. But despite its riches, power and influence, there were many dark secrets that lurked behind the grandeur. And today, we'll explore the untold stories of the Ottoman Harem, where life was not always as luxurious as it appeared. The story begins with a famous historical figure, Ibrahim Pasha, the Grand Vizier of the Ottoman Sultan, Mehmed VI. He was a man who had risen through the ranks from being an ordinary Janissary soldier to becoming the most powerful man in the empire, second only to the Sultan. However, his rise to power was marked by tragedy, as he had to kill his brother in cold blood to ascend. This sets the tone for the extreme lengths people would go to secure their position within the Ottoman court. To understand the power struggles that took place in the harem, it's crucial to know how the harem operated. The word harem actually means private chambers or women's quarters in Turkish. It wasn't just a place where the wives and concubines of the Sultan lived, but also a mini-city unto itself. Within its walls were gardens, fountains, workshops, and even stables. There were separate sections for the Sultan's wife, his concubines, and their servants, and each woman had to abide by a strict set of rules. They were expected to live separate lives, secluded from the outside world. They were unallowed to own property or manage their own finances, and they could be punished severely for any perceived disobedience. Despite these restrictions, the women in the harem weren't necessarily unhappy. In fact, some historians argue that life in the harem was more like a comfortable retirement than a prison sentence. The women were well-fed, had access to fine clothing and jewelry, and didn't have to worry about domestic duties. In addition, sexual activity was encouraged among the women as a means to produce heirs for the Ottoman dynasty. While this may sound appalling to us now, it was considered normal practice at the time. However, the reality of life in the harem was much more complex than this sanitized version suggests. For instance, women were constantly ranked according to their beauty and sexual desirability, and those who fell out of favor could be quickly discarded. In addition, the competition for the Sultan's attention was fierce, and women were willing to do anything to get ahead, including killing other women. It was a dog-eat-dog world, and only the most cunning and ruthless could survive. This brings us back to Ibrahim Pasha and his treacherous rise to power. After killing his own brother, he set his sights on the Sultan's daughter, Sultan. He began by showering her with gifts and compliments, all while keeping a close eye on her movements. Then when he felt the time was right, he invited the Sultan to a party he hosted in his honor. While everyone was distracted by Ibrahim Pasha's lavish display of wealth and power, he slipped away and took the young princess to a secret room where he forcibly married her. Ibrahim Pasha's actions were a direct violation of the rules and customs of the Ottoman Empire. Marrying the Sultan's child was a serious offense and usually punishable by death, but Ibrahim Pasha was undeterred. He knew that he had the support of the Sultan's wife, Harem Sultan, who was also the mother of the current Sultan, and together they hatched a plan to remove the Sultan from power and replace him with Ibrahim Pasha's son. Over the next few years, Ibrahim Pasha Estar continued to rise, and he became one of the most powerful men in the empire. But his enemies were growing impatient, and soon they would make their move. A group of courtiers, led by the Sultan's brother, Mirsafanlu Mustafa Pasha, conspired to overthrow Ibrahim Pasha and restore the Sultan to power. On the night of May 1577, they snuck into Ibrahim Pasha's house and arrested him. The next day, they dragged him through the streets of Istanbul to the palace, where the Sultan awaited his arrival. In a dramatic showdown, Ibrahim Pasha tried to defend himself, but it was no use. The Sultan, who had been manipulated by his wife and brother, ordered for Ibrahim Pasha's execution. In the end, he was strangled to death, a fate worse than death for an Ottoman official. His head was cut off and hung from the gallows that had been used to execute him. Meanwhile, his body was thrown into the Bosphorus Strait to be devoured by the fish. His wife and children were also executed, leaving no survivors of the once powerful family. So why do we find this story so fascinating? Well, for one thing, it gives us a glimpse into the darker side of human nature, the lengths to which people will go to gain power, and the things they'll do to protect it. But it also shows us the importance of family and loyalty. Despite everything, Ibrahim Pasha remained loyal to his family, even in the face of certain death. He knew that if he didn't protect them, no one else would. And this story is not unique to the Ottoman Empire. It's a story that has been repeated throughout history, again and again, in different cultures and different times. In fact, it's a story that continues to unfold today, even in our own society. We see it in the ruthless business world where CEOs will do anything to stay on top, and in the cutthroat world of politics, where politicians will betray anyone who gets in their way. But what makes this story particularly relevant to us today is that it reminds us of the importance of being true to ourselves. In a world where everyone is fighting to get ahead, it can be easy to lose sight of what really matters. But Ibrahim Pasha's story is a reminder that we should never compromise our values or betray those we love in pursuit of power or wealth. The decline of the Ottoman Empire is a topic that has been studied extensively by historians. Some point to internal factors, such as the growing power of the sultan's wife and concubines, as one of the reasons for the empire's decline. The rise of women in positions of power created a breeding ground for intrigue, betrayal, and ultimately instability. As women fought for their own interests, they created divisions within the court that weakened the empire from within. On the other hand, external factors also played a significant role. The Ottoman Empire was under constant threat from external forces such as the Habsburg, Austrian, and Russian empires. These external pressures put a strain on the resources and manpower of the empire, making it difficult to maintain stability and prosperity. As the empire struggled to defend its borders, it became increasingly vulnerable to internal strife and decay. Moreover, economic factors also contributed to the decline of the Ottoman Empire. The empire's once robust economy began to decline due to factors such as inflation, high taxes, and a loss of trade. This economic instability created a climate of uncertainty and hardship for the people, which in turn made it difficult for the government to maintain control and order. As the empire began to crumble, the power struggles within the harem intensified. Women who once lived in relative peace and luxury were now fighting for their own survival. The once opulent chambers became a battleground for deceit, betrayal, and murder, as women were willing to do anything to protect themselves and their children. One of the most infamous examples of this was the case of Safi, the wife of Sultan Ahmed III. As the empire crumbled around her, Safi found herself caught in a web of intrigue and danger. She had managed to secure a powerful position in the harem and was determined to protect it at all costs. When she learned of a plot to remove her from power, she acted swiftly and decisively. She accused one of her fellow wives of being involved in the plot and had her put to death. Not satisfied with this, Safi went further and had all the women in the harem who had ever spoken against her exiled or executed. She turned the once nurturing chambers of the harem into a place of fear and paranoia. Her paranoia grew to such an extent that she began to suspect everyone around her, including her own husband. She had many of her husband's advisors and courtiers put to death on false charges, believing that they were plotting against her. This created a climate of fear and distrust within the court, which ultimately contributed to the downfall of the empire. Another example of the lengths to which women would go to protect themselves in the crumbling Ottoman Empire was the case of Turhan Hattest Sultan, the wife of Sultan Mehmed IV. As the empire grew weaker, Turhan found herself caught in a struggle for power between her husband and his brother, Mustafa. When Mustafa attempted to seize power, Turhan Hattest Sultan used her influence to have him deposed and blinded. She then turned her attention to her son, who she believed was the rightful heir to the throne. She raised him to be a strong and ruthless ruler, grooming him for power while keeping him isolated from the rest of the court. This created a deep rift within the family and ultimately led to the fragmentation of the empire. These examples demonstrate the lengths to which women would go to protect themselves and their interests in the crumbling Ottoman Empire. What makes their stories particularly compelling is that they challenge the traditional narrative of women as passive victims of history. Instead, they present women as active agents who are capable of great cunning, ruthlessness, and ambition. However, it's important to note that this wasn't the experience of all women in the Ottoman Empire. Many women found ways to navigate the treacherous waters of the harem and still maintain their dignity and autonomy. They used their intelligence and wit to outmaneuver their rivals and secure their own power and influence. Despite the tragic fates of some, there were others who managed to carve out a place for themselves in the chaotic world of the Ottoman court. Their stories, though often overlooked, are an essential part of understanding the full complexity of women's experiences in the Ottoman Empire.